The central judicial spire of Avender Prime was a monument to a needle of polished black stone that pierced the smog-choked sky. It housed the most feared legal system in the known galaxy, the Imperial Magistratum. And I, Joran Thorne, a freighter pilot with a loose tongue and a very specific fondness for expensive illicit brandy, was currently its star attraction. The charge was posted on the wall behind the magistrate's bench in glowing crimson script: high treason and sedition, insulting the sovereign person of the Empire. My crime? I had called Princess Kaelia Drakon a delightful piece of work, with a smile that could launch 1,000 ships, preferably all of them headed away from me. In my defense, I was drunk. Very drunk. And she had been undercover. Let me back up. 3 standard weeks ago, I was just another cog in the Imperial trade machine. My ship, the Gravity's Misfortune, was a beat-up hauler-class vessel that smelled faintly of recycled air and regret. I ran contraband, but only the classy kind: rare spices, vintage wines, and the occasional piece of pre-imperial art for wealthy collectors who didn't ask questions. It wasn't honest work, but it paid the docking fees. My downfall began in a dive bar on the lower levels of Nexus Station. The kind of bar where the lights were deliberately dim to hide the mold, and the patrons were deliberately vague about their occupations. I was there to meet a fence about a shipment of Zarian silk. The fence was late. The bar's house brandy was cheap. You do the math. I was 3 glasses in, minding my own business, and composing a mental poem about the aerodynamic flaws of the new Imperial starfighter when a woman sat down on the stool next to me. She was distracting. That's the only word for it. She wore a nondescript gray tunic, the kind favored by station techs, but it couldn't hide the sharp intelligence in her dark eyes or the way a single strand of silver-streaked black hair fell across her face. She ordered water. Water. In a dive bar. That alone should have been my first warning. "Rough night?" she asked, her voice a low contralto that cut through the bar's ambient noise. "Rough life," I corrected, raising my glass. "The night's just the highlight reel." She smiled. It was a small smile, a slight curving of her lips, but it did something complicated to my internal organs. "You're a philosopher." "I'm a freighter pilot," I said. "Same thing, less pay. What's your excuse for being in a place like this? Lose a bet." "Something like that," she said, her eyes scanning the room with a practiced ease that I, in my brandy-soaked state, mistook for nervousness. "I'm waiting for someone. Hiding, really." "From who?" "The Empire." I choked on my brandy.
People didn't say things like that.
Not out loud. Not ever. The walls had ears, and the ears belonged to the Imperial Security Bureau, the ISB. I lowered my voice. "Lady, you don't say that kind of thing. You especially don't say it to strangers." She leaned closer. I caught a faint scent of something clean and expensive, totally at odds with her gray tunic. "You look like a man who doesn't love the Empire." "I love my ship," I corrected. "I love a full cargo hold and an empty flight lane." "The Empire?" "The Empire loves taxes and paperwork. It's a one-sided relationship." That smile again, wider this time. It was dangerous. "So you find the Empire tedious?" "I find the Empire," I said, warming to my theme, the brandy loosening the last of my common sense, to be a collection of bureaucrats and posturing nobles who wouldn't know a real day's work if it landed a star destroyer on their heads. Take the princess, for example. Kaelia Drakon. Her eyebrow arched. The princess. Publicity's stun incarnate, I declared, waving my glass. Parades and galas, and smiling for the holocameras. A lovely face for a loveless regime. I bet she's never even seen a real starship up close, let alone flown one. Probably thinks a plasma conduit is a new type of hair curler. The woman's eyes glittered with amusement. You seem to have given this considerable thought. A man has hobbies, I shrugged. Some collect stamps. I collect observations about the futility of imperial grandeur. She's a delightful piece of work, I'll give her that. A smile that could launch 1,000 ships. Preferably all of them headed away from me. She laughed. A real laugh. Full and warm. It was the most beautiful sound I'd heard in years. For a moment, the dingy bar, the threat of the ISB, the whole galaxy faded away. It was just me, her, and the intoxicating possibility that I wasn't as alone as I thought. Then the lights came on. The doors slammed shut, and a squad of ISB agents in their stark white uniforms flooded the room, plasma rifles raised. The woman next to me sighed, a sound of profound irritation. Timing, she murmured to herself. Always the timing. An agent, a captain with a face like a clenched fist, marched up to us.
He didn't look at me.
He looked at her, and he snapped to attention so fast I heard his spine crack. Your Highness, he barked. We've been searching for you for hours. Your father is furious. You cannot simply disappear from your own security detail. Your Highness. The word bounced around my skull, refusing to find purchase. I turned, very slowly, to look at the woman beside me. The woman I had just called a publicity stunt. The woman whose smile I had insulted. The woman whose entire existence I had just mocked with the poetic grace of a drunken fool. Her eyes met mine, and for a split second, the amusement was back. Then the mask of royalty slid into place. She stood, and the gray tunic suddenly looked like the most expensive garment in the room. Captain, she said, her voice now carrying the cold weight of command. This man was with me. The ISB captain finally looked at me, and his expression was that of a man who has just found a cockroach in his gourmet meal. Him, Your Highness, we have audio recordings of his seditious remarks. He has violated 17 separate articles of the Imperial Civil Code. He's going to the Magistratum. Of course he is, the princess, Kaelia Drakon said smoothly. I will be pressing charges, personally. Insulting a member of the Imperial family is a grave offense. I want him tried before the highest court. Make the arrangements. And that is how I ended up in the Central Judicial Spire, standing in a soundproofed defendant's box, staring at a magistrate who looked like he hadn't smiled since the previous dynasty. The trial was a farce. A pre-written script. The prosecutor, a weasel of a man with slicked-back hair, played the audio recordings for the packed courtroom. My voice, slurred and arrogant, filled the chamber. A lovely face for a loveless regime, a delightful piece of work, a smile that could launch 1,000 ships, preferably all of them headed away from me. The gallery gasped on cue. The magistrate's scowl deepened. I was already mentally composing my final message to the Gravity's misfortune, apologizing for leaving her to the salvage yards. The defendant's words are a direct attack on the sanctity of the imperial bloodline, the prosecutor thundered, pointing a trembling finger at me. They are seditious, treasonous, an insult to every loyal citizen of the empire. We demand the maximum penalty. The magistrate looked down at me, his eyes like chips of glacial ice. Joran Thorne, you've been found guilty of high treason. The sentence is death, to be carried out by exposure in the arena. Objection. The word cut through the room like a blade. Every head turned. Princess Kaelia Drakon rose from the Imperial Gallery, resplendent in a gown of deep crimson silk. She looked nothing like the woman in the bar. She looked like a force of nature. The magistrate's gavel froze mid-tap. Your Highness? The prosecution rests. The verdict is... The verdict is incorrect, she said, her voice calm but carrying to every corner of the room. She stepped down from the gallery and walked towards the magistrate's bench, her heels clicking on the polished stone floor. I am the aggrieved party in this case. My interpretation of the events is the only one that matters, and I say the defendant is innocent. A wave of murmurs swept through the crowd. The prosecutor's face went pale. Your Highness, with all due respect, the audio evidence is undeniable. He called you. I know what he called me, she interrupted, stopping directly in front of my defendant's box. She turned to face the court, her expression one of regal boredom. He called me a delightful piece of work. He commented on my smile. He made a metaphor about ships. Exactly, the prosecutor exclaimed. Treason. It's flirting, the princess said flatly. The silence that followed was so absolute, I could hear my own heartbeat. I'm sorry, the magistrate whispered. Flirting, she repeated, as if explaining a simple concept to a slow child. It's a social ritual performed between individuals who find each other mutually attractive. It often involves playful teasing, exaggerated compliments, and mild insults. I was undercover, conducting a low-level security assessment of public sentiment. The defendant approached me. He bought me a drink. He engaged me in conversation. He attempted to impress me with his wit. She turned to look at me, and for a fleeting second, the woman from the bar was back. It was clumsy, poorly executed, and fueled by cheap brandy. But it was, without a doubt, an attempt at flirtation. He was trying to get my attention. The magistrate sputtered. But the content, Your Highness. He called the empire. Tedious, she supplied. Bureaucratic? Full of posturing nobles? These are not state secrets, magistrate. These are opinions. Every citizen of this empire is entitled to their opinions, no matter how ill-informed. She fixed him with a stare that could have melted durasteel. Unless you are suggesting that the Imperial family is so fragile, so insecure in its position, that it cannot withstand the drunken ramblings of a freighter pilot in a dive bar? The trap was sprung. The magistrate couldn't agree without admitting the empire was weak. He couldn't disagree without freeing me. He chose to free me. The court accepts the interpretation of the imperial witness, he mumbled, slamming his gavel with all the enthusiasm of a man pronouncing his own doom. Case dismissed. The defendant is released into the custody of the princess for further evaluation of his inappropriate social behavior. The crowd erupted. The prosecutor looked like he was about to faint. And I just stood there, my mind blank, as the ISB agents opened my box and roughly escorted me out of the courtroom. I was taken not to a prison cell, but to a private turbolift. We rose through the spire, past the judicial levels, past the administrative levels, all the way to the top. The doors opened onto a luxurious penthouse suite with a panoramic view of the city. The princess was standing by the window, a glass of something amber in her hand. The guards pushed me inside, and the door slid shut, leaving us alone. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. For the first time in my life, I was speechless. She turned, a faint smile playing on her lips. She held up the glass. Zarian silk brandy, 30-year vintage. I had my staff acquire it from your ship. You have excellent taste in contraband. I finally found my voice. You saved my life. I corrected a legal error, she said, taking a sip. There's a difference. Why? She walked towards me, her crimson gown whispering against the floor. She stopped close, too close, and looked up at me with those dark, intelligent eyes. Because it's been a very long time since anyone spoke to me like a real person. Since anyone looked at me and saw a woman, not a title. You were drunk, and you were foolish, and your poetry was terrible. She reached up and straightened the collar of my prison-issue tunic. But you are real. In a galaxy full of people bowing and scraping, you were real. I stared at her, this impossible woman who held my life in her hands. So, what happens now? The magistrate said I'm in your custody. The magistrate, she said, her smile widening into something genuinely mischievous, is an idiot. You are in my quarters. You are drinking my brandy. And you're going to tell me more about those aerodynamic flaws in the new Imperial starfighter. She turned and walked back towards the window, leaving me standing there, utterly bewildered. Joran, she said, without looking back, join me. And for the first time in my life, I didn't question my luck. I didn't run. I walked over to the most powerful woman in the Empire, took the glass of brandy she offered, and stood beside her, looking out at the city below. Outside, the Empire churned on, oblivious to the small rebellion happening in the penthouse. Inside, a freighter pilot and a princess clinked glasses, and the galaxy, for just a moment, felt a little less lonely. Your poetry, she said quietly, after a long silence. It really was terrible. I was under duress, I replied. She laughed, that warm, real laugh from the bar. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that my trial wasn't over. It had just begun.